Hey, this is Chuck Shute. If you enjoy my podcast and enjoy the content, go ahead and hit that subscribe button on your phone, and that way you'll never miss another episode of my podcast. I've got Myq Kaplan today, and I hope you guys enjoy this episode. Welcome to the Chuck Shute podcast. Really excited today. I've got a great guest. I know I say that every week, but this might be one of the biggest guests I've had so far. Comedian, actor, writer, musician, fellow podcaster, Myq Kaplan. Hilarious guy. I saw his stand-up and immediately knew this is a guy I'm going to follow. I'm definitely a fan. I posted a clip on my Facebook. You can check that out. He's got a special out on Amazon Prime right now. We're going to talk about all that stuff today in this interview. The interview actually started a little later. It was supposed to do it this morning, but what happened was his girlfriend actually slipped on ice last night and broke her ankle. So he was in the hospital. So we actually had to do it at a later time. I didn't know when we were going to do it. So he said, "Hey, I'm ready now." I'm like, "Oh gosh." So I was at the gym. I raced home. I was a little flustered. I forgot to hit the record button, but thankfully I caught my air. But the first couple minutes are cut off. But all I asked him at the beginning was just, we talked about the town that he's from, Livingston, New Jersey, how Jason Alexander and Chelsea Handler are from there, and he told me that Mitch Hedberg had died there. And then I asked him about his upbringing, because both of his parents are music teachers, and he started playing the violin at age 4. And so that's what he's talking about when you'll hear right now. That's where the interview starts. He's explaining how a 4-year-old can play a violin, because I was very curious about that. And then the rest of the interview should be fine with that. So here you go. It's Myq Kaplan. I hope you guys enjoy it.
Set your arm and then go from there, like with these specific motions to put it up. 4-year-olds are ice skating and doing gymnastics, and like not everybody's the best at everything, and nobody's good at anything until they start. But you start training early enough, and then you learn, and then they give you a tiny violin, and you make horrible sounds with it, and then eventually, hopefully, they sound slightly better.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, and then you kept doing it, and it sounds like you had obviously a natural artistic ability. And then you ended up playing the guitar, and you got really into that. You like to draw, and then it's interesting. When I first started watching your comedy, I could tell that you were really smart, similar to your buddy Dan Wilbur, and that's why I think I like you guys. But then when I was doing my research, it's more than you're just smart. I mean, you actually have a bachelor's degree from Brandeis University, and then which is in psychology and philosophy, and then you actually have a master's from Boston University in linguistics. So talk about that, like how that's kind of helped you, because your bachelor's is in again, psychology and philosophy, and you talked about maybe even you considered being a counselor or a teacher. And I got to say, as someone who works in education, I think you dodged a bullet there. So how does that?
Well, I think every human being is, potentially creative, and or actually, I think most of us when we're kids do some kind of, drawing or painting or singing or dancing or whatever it is. Like there's this artist I like, a writer, a comic book writer named Linda Barry, who has these really great philosophical art books. And one of the questions that she asks him is, how old do you have to be to make a bad drawing? Because, if a 2-year-old draws something and it doesn't look like photorealistic, you're not going to be like, "Hey, try again,"
right.
You dummy. I've heard that the idea of rewarding people for not for achieving something or accomplishing something, but for just the action of doing it. If you're a parent or a teacher, be like, look at what you're doing. You're really doing something, because the process of doing is what leads someone to be good at something.
Mm-hmm.
Which for me, drawing, I was good at it, and then I stopped doing it partially because I thought I was not getting better. But probably I didn't get better because at a certain point I stopped doing it.
Right.
And it's not to say that everyone has the exact same capacity for all of the same topics. Like, so the talent that I can't say for sure how much, inherent talent I had, for or music ability for the violin existed, or if it was just that my mom was so gung ho. She's like, I love music and I want my son to love music, so I'm going to, dip him in this, the river music.
Right. But so you never thought of going into the music or the arts in school? You never thought of majoring in that? Or, you didn't take drama or theater or anything like that?
Well, no, but so I started teaching myself guitar in high school, and I loved it because I wasn't required to do it. That was one of the things which I didn't explicitly think all of this at the time, but I mean, the violin was sort of mandatory, and so
sure.
The summer camp that I went to for many years, called Bucks Rock, it was a creative and performing arts camp, and I believe the original founder of it, Ernst Bulova, he said once something that stuck with me, that he said, children love to learn, but they don't like to be taught. The idea, and I think that's for a lot of humans, like, we don't like to be told what to do.
Right.
Like one time my dad reminded me that it was my grandmother's birthday, and he was like, to give her a call. And I was like, I was gonna, like, I already knew, so that instinct exists. And then, as we get to be adults, like, we hopefully, become our own parents, become our own both like teachers and learners in ways, and we, reach out and like ask people for advice or guidance, or look to see who is doing things that we, that we wish we could or want to, and be like, oh, what did they do? And then not be like, well, you can't tell me what to do. Be like, oh, like, I mean, will you tell me what you did or what I can do? And so that, for me, the guitar was that. I discovered, I just, picked it up and started teaching myself because my mom had sheet music around that I could just learn from. And I had, my fingers knew how to do like stringed instrument action because of the violin. So at that point, I was grateful for the fact that the violin had been foisted upon me, all those like skills, like undesirably,
right.
now gratefully. And so that when I went to college, I loved playing the guitar. I loved writing songs. I joined an a cappella group. I joined a chamber choir at school, but I explicitly did not choose. I chose not to major in music for the very reason that I wanted to just keep loving it.
Right.
I wanted to not, like, I took a class in the Introduction to the Moving Image, introductory film class. And the first day they said, after this class, you're not going to be able to enjoy a movie the same way again. And I'm like, but I love to enjoy movies. So I dropped the class.
Yeah. Geez. So do you feel like as you get older too, it's harder? Like you said, when you say, people want to almost kind of not necessarily force stuff on you, but like they don't like being told what to do. I feel like as I get older, that's harder. When people try to tell me what to do, I'm like, I'm 41 years old. I feel like I'm too old to take orders. Like, do you have that similar kind of feeling with that kind of thing?
Well, I think that, the hope is that as we gain age, we also gain wisdom, experience, perspective, the capacity to know, like, there's still, like, I'm also 41, and I know more than I did 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago when I was a kid. And also I know that I certainly don't know everything about everything, or even about anything, even the things that, if we're an expert in one thing, like we don't know everything about that thing, and surely we don't know everything about the other things. So I do think there's a quote I like from this poet named, I think it's Robert Hass, or Hass, Hass. He says, repetition makes us feel secure, variation makes us feel free. And so we do sometimes, as human beings, like, we value both, like comfort and
Definitely.
freedom, security, and like new things, like in sort of like maybe a yin yang, you need some of each. Like, you don't want to do the same thing every day with no variation. But also perhaps you have some rituals, perhaps your job or hobbies or relationships. If there are constants, that consistency brings us comfort. So it's like, and maybe there can be a fine line between comfort and boredom, but with respect to learning new things, like my grandmother is 91, or yeah, just turned 91,
Wow.
and she's on Facebook. She plays Scrabble with her friends
Hmm.
online. Like she learned how to do that. There were
Yeah.
hardly cars or movies when she was
Wow.
growing up. Um,
But it
and so
sounds like, yeah,
maybe
you kind of need both. You need that stability, but you also need some sort of variety, or you're going to get bored, like you said. You need to be, and like I think learning is a big thing too. You got to be learning new things.
and so my grandmother now, she has a cell phone but not a smartphone. She's like, I'm not gonna get one of those. I would never learn how to use it. And I'm like, you learned how to use like this gigantic, this completely new thing. And she's like, but that was a while ago. And I'm like, it's
Wow.
interesting because I think that she could, if she
Yeah.
wanted to, because
Sure.
like she did. And obviously at certain points, like, maybe our capacities might diminish as we get older, but that also might just be sort of, the ageism that exists within our culture's ideas, because she's still very sharp in many
Oh
ways.
yeah.
She's competent and capable. And so you as a 41-year-old, she doesn't want to be told what to do. You don't want to be told what, none of us
Right.
want to be, or we want to be in as much control as possible of who's telling us to do what. Like if we want
Right.
to learn something new, if we want to be like, if you wanted to start learning how to play an instrument or a language, to learn, like, now, you would either get books or watch tutorials, or you could get a teacher. And like when you hire a teacher, you're like, will you please tell me, what to do, how to do this, or learn by watching other people. And there's different different personality types, and different, probably, manners in which people learn. So for myself, that is just why I was like, I want to love music, and so I don't want to have to take classes that somebody
Mm-hmm.
says you got to take this music history class if you
Right.
want to really be an expert in music. Like, well, I just want to do the thing that I love, which right now is playing the guitar, writing songs, singing
Mm-hmm.
songs, performing, eventually leading me to comedy, because some of my songs were funny and I performed them at a comedy club, and then in between the songs would talk and be like, oh, this is really fun as well. And I expanded the talking, and I was like, now I don't even have to bring the guitar anymore. But one of the reasons that I went to grad school was because I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do when I was out of college, other than it's funny to say it like that. I did know exactly what I wanted to do, but I didn't know how, and I couldn't quite do it yet, because what I wanted to do was be a singer-songwriter, be a professional performer, recording artist. And I knew that at age 21, 22, I didn't have a fan base. I hadn't produced, albums that were selling, so that I could make my living from that. So I knew that I needed to continue to live and do something to make money and pay rent while I was doing the actions of getting both better at, the art of performing, creating music, comedy, and figuring out that comedy was the thing that my career was morphing into, which is kind of nice, leaving music still as just a beloved hobby that I don't have to do.
Right. So
Sometimes
speaking of the comedy, like, what were your early, your early comedy influences? Like, I know you're a fan of Back to the Future and Groundhog Day because you talk about those in your routine, but is there other movies that are TV shows or comedians that influence your comedy?
Well, I mean, on one level, everything influences everything that we do. So, I could tell you a bunch of movies that I remember. Like, probably The Princess Bride was something that I loved.
It's a great movie.
Growing up, I watched, Roseanne. I watched, The Fresh Prince. I watched like reruns of Cheers and Night Court. I loved Mad About You. Actually, the first comedian who I ever saw a full 1 hour special of was Paul Reiser, when I was probably like a young teenager. I think he had a special that came out in the 80s, and I thought maybe they were showing it on VH1. And I loved it. I was a kid. I'd never kissed a girl, and I'm loving this comedy about a man talking about his wife and like living with a person monogamously, and the kind of things that he then talked about on, like, they discussed on Mad About You.
Sure.
And I got his book Couplehood, and I read it, and I got it on tape, and I just listened to it while I drove, and it was just still, like to this day now, in every relationship I've been in, something will happen and I'll be like, oh, this is just like that Paul Reiser bit about couples. And to the point, one girlfriend like 10 years ago, she's like, I don't know if I always hated Paul Reiser, but I certainly hate him now.
Did you ever meet Paul Reiser or ever work with him?
I did get to open for him once, maybe like 4 or 5 years ago at a casino in upstate New York, and it was a delight. He had brand new material from since 30 years ago, which is great.
That's good.
And I told him that he was the first comedian that I'd ever really experienced the comedy of, and he was very gracious, and it was a pleasure. But also, to answer your question of what comedy influenced me, I think in one way, sort of a double-edged sword. Like I have some friends who, like my friend Shane Moss is a comedian who like knew he wanted to be a comedian since he was a child. Tommy Johnigan, another friend, they were watching like maybe Letterman, Conan as kids, or watching stand-ups, knowing that stand-up was a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then they, immersed themselves in it and loved it, and then became wonderful stand-up comedians, like, having had that be their goal the whole time. Whereas for me, I didn't even really know that it was a thing. I knew that Paul Reiser was one, but he was also a famous person. I knew that Seinfeld was one, but he was a famous person. Everybody on Saturday Night Live, like I saw a Dana Carvey special, a Norm Macdonald special. I honestly didn't, the way that I thought about it at the time, as a teenager, I was like, okay, so I guess once you're a famous person on TV, then you can do stand-up.
Okay.
I didn't know that there were like unknown comedians, because I didn't know any unknown comedians.
Sure. No, that makes sense. So then did you morph the music into the stand-up? Like, did you start off doing the songs and then one day you actually just didn't have the guitar and you just did the stand-up jokes?
Almost. So at the same time, so around my senior year of college is when I started really performing my music around Boston, where I was in school. And so, like I said, when I performed first at this comedy club, which I looked up online where like clubs were, where like rock bands could perform, where singer-songwriters, folk singers, whoever. And I asked friends who were in bands to like recommend me, and lots of places were just like, you need to have a fan base, you need to bring people, you need to or do open mics. And so the Comedy Studio is the first comedy club I performed in, and I went there and they gave me 5 minutes, and I played like 2 short songs, like 2-minute songs, and in between I just talked, or like at the beginning I talked. Like the very first time I performed, I went on right after Jonathan Katz, who at the time or recently had the show on Comedy Central, Dr. Katz, Professional Therapist, which I had seen and I had loved. And he lived in that area, in the Boston area, and he performed. And so I was about to go on, and he closes his set, which is great, with he does a song. And I was like, so I came on, and I honestly, this must have been, I was saying it as a joke, but also out of genuine like concern and nerves. I was like, this is my first time performing at this club. This is my first time performing at any comedy club. I'm here to do like comedy songs, like, funny music. And I'm performing after the most famous funny person in the room just did exactly that. So, I was like, I hope this is good too, and so I feel like those nerves were like endearing to people. Like people laughed at what I was saying, whatever it was. I must have said it way better than what I do right now. But I was so funny when I was just starting out, and now it's gone all downhill. But so that was the thing that I'd been like funny to my friends. If I performed at like a talent show or a coffee house, like it's a very common thing if you're a musician to, say a couple things before you start your song. But I hadn't like written jokes. But I just found out that in between the songs and like around when I wasn't doing the songs, if I was saying things, like sometimes it would make people laugh. And that was what made me want to do comedy. So sometimes people ask me, when did you know you wanted to do comedy? And I'll say it was just after I started doing comedy. I knew that I wanted to, because I already was doing it. I was like, oh, I want to do what has already happened again. And so that is what I was doing while I was in grad school, which
Right.
I was giving myself the opportunity to do, because I knew at that point I was like, oh, I want to keep doing this. So I went to BU. I loved linguistics. I was studying that for its own sake. I was living as a resident assistant, so I didn't have to pay for housing. So it was I just got to do that job, go to class, and then go out pretty much every night and do comedy.
Yeah, and then you won the funniest student contest. So did that kind of give you a jumping off point to thinking, maybe I can do this for a living?
Yes, and also I already had like a delusional level of self-confidence inspired by, in part, my family. I was an only child, and I was told that I could do anything. I could be
Right.
president, and now I'm like, oh, I don't think I can and don't want to.
Yeah, right.
So that's a thing. But also, like, society, I'm a straight white male, and I'm an American. I was raised, with so much.
Yes.
And I didn't even know about these things. I didn't know about all the currents that were carrying me forward. Like I read an article once about two transgender academics who were working in the same field. One of them was assigned female at birth. One of them was assigned male at birth. And each of them at various points originally in their career were living as that assigned gender, but then transitioned and lived as their true gender. And so they both experienced living and working and being treated as male and female, and that the main takeaway from this piece was when for both female time periods, whether cisgender or transgender, like the people were treated worse, like in their community, in their academic community. Like there was sexism that was affecting them, and when they were when male presenting, male being, they were treated like with more reverence, with more respect. So they were, uniquely able to spot this current of sexism that, runs through our society that most people don't get to experience both sides of.
Right.
If you're not gender fluid, if you're not transgender, if you're not somebody who has lived presenting as multiple genders, then you only know your own experience, and you can't compare it to somebody else's because you haven't had it. But for these two people, they both were aware. They're like, oh wow, like, and so the analogy to the current is like, if you're a man, if you're any privileged class, again, it doesn't mean that you have everything easy, but the current is pushing you forward, so you're traveling farther with the same amount of work,
Right.
And then that can be like a positive feedback loop. Like you're like, oh wow, I guess I'm good at this, and so you then work harder and keep doing it, and then you actually, it's like a fake it till you make it. You do get better at the thing because the thing that makes you good at it is doing the thing. Whereas if you are, let's say, a woman in a sexist field, which is many fields, you are putting in, sometimes they say you got to work twice as hard to achieve half as much, and sometimes that's because the current is pushing against you, and so the current is you're like, I think I'm working just as hard as these people, but they're getting farther than me, and that can be disheartening and disillusioning, and then that can cause people to quit and then not achieve as much because through no fault of their own, because of systemic structures. And so I understand that I have been the beneficiary of these systemic currents for many aspects of who I am, how I live, and what I do. So this is all to say, like, because of the societal opposite of pressures, the societal flow carrying me forward, and also the love of my family and the support and all the fortunate upbringing that I have, where like when people are like, when I started doing comedy, I wasn't good. I mean, nobody is good when you start, but I didn't know it, and that served me. People, audiences were probably like literally and or at least figuratively, symbolically telling me like, you're not good at this, but I was like, I think my grandmother knows a little better than every audience. You know?
Right. So, but you must have had some adversity. I mean, you have some strikes against you, right? I mean, I don't know, maybe not in the entertainment business, but I mean, being Jewish, right? I mean, do you ever face anti-Semitism and I mean, your comedy special, you know, small dork. I mean, so you're saying that, I'm not saying, but you're saying you're small and you're, I mean, those things, did those not ever fight against you sometimes? Were there roles that you were maybe turned down because you weren't tall enough or too dorky or?
I'm sure. First of all, how dare you? I am,
hey, it's your special. That's what you called it. I didn't say it.
I understand, and we're all having fun here.
No. I got to tell you this story, though, real quick, though. Going back to the Jewish thing. So I dated a Jewish girl for like an entire year, right? And one time we were selling, I was moving to Arizona from Seattle, and I was selling my mattress on Craigslist. And these people came over to look at it, and we had agreed on a price, I don't know, $150, whatever. They said, yeah, don't worry, we got you the full $150. We're not going to Jew you. And my girlfriend is right at the time, Jewish girl standing right there, like said that right in front of her. It was I thought she was going to reach over and slap him. Like, I couldn't believe people, like, it just, that kind of stuff makes me cringe. So you must have there must be a story of that for you, right? Somewhere.
I mean, I think that, yeah, probably. Like, I don't know when I learned about, you know, that, like, the word Jew being used as a verb. Like, it seems almost cartoonish because it's
right?
not something, but there are obviously people who have grown up with it. And I've still seen people. There's a comedian friend of mine from Boston named Dan Bolger, who's very funny. And he has a great joke about how, like, a lot, I feel like this happens also with the word gay. Like, the word, you know, gay can be used by a proud gay person to be like, I'm gay, but also the word can be used, you know, pejoratively and depending on tone and intent, like, you know, and there's a lot of kids growing up, at least when I was a kid, and perhaps still, but certainly going back far enough, people are using the word as a slur. But so my friend Dan's joke was about people who, they're like, his impression of a person who's like, now when I call, I'm not meaning gay like homosexual. Like, you know, if I say that I think traffic is gay, I'm not saying that traffic is a homosexual. I'm just saying that traffic is a thing that I hate.
God, you're right though. Yeah.
So there are people who would say, "Oh no, the verb to Jew, that it just means the stereotype about Jews, not that it's actually." You know, I can't even really understand. So
that was interesting to hear you break that down with that master's in linguistics. I can hear that at work right there.
I appreciate it. So I guess I was fortunate that I was raised, you know, in like a suburb of in New Jersey, and with, you know, I went to decent. I mean, I went to school. I'm sure that there were some kids and some parents and some families around that, you know, wouldn't have been my favorite if I had gotten to know them all. But I honestly don't think that I knew that I was experiencing anti-Semitism or, like, you know, people making comments or treating me in a way because I was Jewish until adulthood, until comedy, really. Like, where I did a show a few years into comedy. Like, I was opening for an Italian comedian in the Boston area who's a nice guy. And also, I think the show was on April 15th, and he was like, April 15th, you know, that's tax day. I'm sure you got yours done. And I was like, honestly, I think I didn't even understand that he was making a joke about it. I was just like, I do have it done, and I don't understand why you're like, isn't everyone meant to have their taxes done by this day? I feel special about me, which also, you know, I'm sure there's a lot of comedians with great jokes about, like, the idea that so many stereotypes, like, can be applied to so many people. Like, Jews, they like money. Like, who's the group that doesn't like money? Oh, no money. just Buddhists. I
Yeah.
mean, like whatever the case is, like so the idea that I thought that is a thing. I was like, oh, there are like I knew that I knew that everybody wasn't Jewish, but
Mm-hmm.
I knew that I was in some ways like the same as a lot of people. Like, you know, that it didn't really matter, it didn't really come up that much growing up. I did another show that I wrote a joke about. I mean, I just told the thing that happened, which is that they were bringing up all the comedians to music. Like they would bring up the DJ brought up a black comedian to hip hop music, and they brought me up to the Price is Right theme song, which is, I think, not the same thing.
No, it's definitely not.
I mean, I don't know what would like what it's weird. There's not I mean there are a ton of Jewish songs, but they're not the
Yeah.
most like they could have brought me up to dreidel. But the like for sure, like I mean to answer your question of like I mean there has been like everyone faces challenges. Everyone has adversity of
Yeah.
some kind.
Yes.
So and it's in some ways all relative because we're all kind of the center of our own universe,
Mm-hmm.
and again, we don't have access to other people's. Like, I mean, so many of the like a lot of the challenges that we're learning about other people facing today is, I mean, one thing that's beautiful about modern technology, the internet, the fact that like there's a lot of negative things that come out of social media. The capacity for Nazis to find each other and unite in solidarity. And also, though, there are people like it used to be if you were the lone gay person in a town or you didn't know who else, you're like, am I alone in the world? And now there are ways for people in marginalized communities to form community,
Sure.
across
Yeah.
the world. And and I guess the idea that there's so many people facing like there's so many almost everyone has some kind of privilege, be it
Right.
race, gender, sexuality, like able-bodiedness, class, nationality. If you're an American citizen, if you're living in America,
Yeah.
all
That's
these
true.
things, and I think that it gets mistaken. There's confusion over like even the term privilege. I've heard people be like, if you're, let's say, a poor white person, you're like, well, I don't have all the privileges that a rich white person has. And it's not about privileges. It's about the fact that like, you have the privilege of like not fearing the same way that a black person does when the police pull you over. That is something that is if not uniquely, it's certainly uniquely a non-white experience.
Right.
Like,
Yeah. There's definitely things that I've never experienced as a straight white male for sure. That like, yeah, I can't, I mean, really even relate to some of that stuff, obviously.
and I'm also like, I don't like, I've been pulled over. Like I've not liked it. I've been afraid, but now I know like I've never been afraid for my life in the way that is much more reasonable for a non-white person to experience. And so like, again, so this is all, I think, hopefully relevant context for why I think it's more important for me to recognize and express and acknowledge the positives that I have, the good fortune that I've had, rather than to focus on like, oh, my parents got divorced when I was 13. And these are all true. Like my parents got divorced when I was like 13 or 14.
Oh.
We moved. I was starting over at a new school in 8th grade. Like I was shy and introverted and not very social and didn't really know how to make friends or meet new kids. So I was an only child. So I was spending a lot of time alone. I did have friends at the summer camp. And so I would see them once in a while. And like the 2 months of the summer was this beautiful, magical utopia. And then the 10 months of the year for those like 8th grade through high school was a slog. It was challenging. I, ate lunch sometimes just alone at my locker. There were some nice kids, but I did, it was, so I definitely faced, some challenging situations. So I do think that so much of my personality and experience was buffeted or helped by like the positive foundation, the formative years and caring family and childhood environment that I had, that even when, like, and this is kind of a maybe an analogy that I've never specifically made before, but the challenges of high school, I was like, well, I know that this isn't forever. I
Wow.
mean, it's not my favorite. I don't even, maybe I didn't know that then. Maybe it seemed like it was forever, but I was like, well, this is what's happening. I
Hmm.
know that there is joy to be had in at summer camp. I know that
Yeah.
I do well in school. Like, there were things that I liked about school, but then comparing that to starting out in comedy, like, I was, not, I knew that I wasn't going to be a superstar, successful comedian right out the gate. I was like, I understand that's not
Hmm.
how you do it. You don't just come
Yeah.
out and have an hour of
Wow.
comedy that could be on TV. So I knew that when I went to open mics and did 5 minutes of comedy, I was like, if one joke works, great. If a few jokes work,
Hmm.
great. If, and then tomorrow I do the ones again that worked and try new ones. And then maybe another new one works until eventually you have a 5 minute set that you think hey, this works regularly more often than it doesn't. And then, a year later, you're like, that 5 minutes is horrible. And then
Hmm.
that, that's good because that means that you are improving. You're like, oh,
Yeah.
wow, I thought the stuff that I thought was good before, whether the material or the delivery or the combination, like, if you think you were bad before, that means that you think you're better now, and that's
Mm-hmm.
that's the goal.
So you had it sounds like a big part of it was your mindset. Then you had a good mindset and you're playing the long game. You realize you're looking forward and ahead and not dwelling on the negative times, like when you were in high school and stuff. So you have a couple jokes though that I wanted to ask you about. That obviously going back to the Jewish stuff, the Hitler time travel joke, that one is so clever. And then I'm actually Catholic, and you do a little Catholic joke about how the Catholic priests only sing two notes, and I was laughing so hard at that because it's like so accurate. So I had to ask you, like, were you friends with a Catholic? Did you actually go to a Catholic church, or did you just see that on TV, or like, because you nailed that?
Uh, that's I like this question for this reason. So the fact that I am Jewish and not Catholic is like is the thing that helps me understand, at least in parallel on a completely different scope and scale, of
Yeah.
how a person, like, how a person who is like a woman knows what it's like to be a woman, but also in America, like, where I live, women live in a society that is patriarchal. So it's sort of like marked for, like, maleness is like the thing, like actor. That's the word that means either a man or a woman, but it also
Mm-hmm.
means man, and you have to specify actress if you want to. You don't have to, but you can. Like comedian, comedienne. Like, it's a special, different thing, and that's happening to every marginalized group. Every marginalized group understands what it is like to be themselves and their identity and their part of the group. And they
Mm-hmm.
also understand the majority because it's everywhere. It's like, imagine like a quiet person. A quiet person understands what it's like to be a quiet person, but they also understand what loud people are because they hear them all the
Right.
time everywhere. Whereas a loud person might not understand what a quiet person is because they're not listening. They're just busy being loud. Like,
Mm.
and that's the same thing for a black person in America. Uh, Knows what it's like explicitly to be black, and they also understand that that we have a white supremacist society in which the power has been white since it was codified in the Constitution when they said all men are created equal. They literally didn't mean women, and they literally only meant white men. And so that to get back to your question, for me, being Jewish in our society, I also it's also there's predominantly the society is full of Christians, so I
Mm.
didn't even set out to learn about Christmas
You
and
didn't have to,
Jesus
yeah.
and Catholicism. It happened through a kind of cultural osmosis. So nobody sat me down and was like, "This is how priests sing." It's just in movies, on
Oh, yeah.
TV,
Okay.
around, like. And so I did date a Catholic girl in college, and I went to one Catholic mass with her, but I have
Okay.
very little memory. The one thing that I remember is that, and this was like I was like 21, 22, and the part where they said, now you all like introduce yourself to your neighbors and you say peace be with
Yeah.
you and also with you. And at the time, that was a thing that I was like, I didn't understand. It seemed kind of artificial and arbitrary. And I'm like, who are these people? Like,
I
why
agree.
Are they wishing
I hated that part. That was the part I hated the most about Catholic Church.
Do you know, I have a friend now who is a minister, not Catholic, but a minister in Chicago who's a very good friend of mine. Used to be a comedian, went to divinity school, now a minister. And I love her. She's a wonderful friend. She's a wonderful storyteller. And when I've gone to the church that she preaches at, one of them, I feel like I am, at age 40, I went to a church service where that same part happened, the peace be with you and also with you. And now I was like, oh, now like I'm a different person and I like this now because I feel like I wasn't at peace before and I am now more at peace. So I don't look at people and think like, I'm like, oh, I wish you peace. I really, like, whoever you are, I want that for people I know, people I don't know, people who are the same as me, people who are different than me, because we all have some things in common and all have some things that are different. But to answer your question, I learned it by existing in society, and I stumbled upon it sincerely. Like that joke was created a lot of my jokes are created kind of piecemeal, like one snowflake at a time, eventually adding up into, an ice sculpture avalanche. So
it's cool. I like that joke. Yeah.
Oh, thanks. I found myself singing that, chanting that way. And then it occurred to me that was a resonant thing that I had heard. I was like, oh, and so it came out.
Perfect. Yeah. So I was listening to your Pete Holmes podcast, you were guest on that. I'm a big fan of his show Crashing. Have you seen that show? I wanted to ask you, like, is that an accurate portrayal of life as a stand-up? Like, as you are going through, is it kind of like that kind of struggle that he goes through in that show? Have you seen that?
Yes. The answer to have I seen it is yes. Is it realistic? There are definitely many things about it. Like, so my grandmother is a nurse, and I remember, like, whenever I would be watching a medical show with her, she would be like, that is wrong. That would never happen. Like, the heart's on the wrong side, whatever it is. I feel like they're probably better now. But like when she was growing up, or when she was, younger, she's like, oh yeah, they don't care about accuracy. And I think that Pete, did a good job, and the people who created the show did a good job being like authentic and genuine. So also, I would say that like some of the things that are like less realistic are, if his life, his career happened over the course of, let's say, I think he and I both actually went to the Just for Laughs Comedy Festival, and were new faces in 2009, so 10 years ago. And I had started doing comedy like 7 years before that, and I think he did as well. I think we both started around the same 2000, somewhere between 2001, 2003-ish. And so when you watch the show, there were 3 seasons of the show, and he went from not doing comedy to the level of success that he achieved over the course of 17 years in 2 years or 3 years.
Okay.
So I think that because it would probably make for a more boring show if they were like, and now this week is another open mic, and this week is another open mic. So I think out of, the necessity of, maybe, what do they say? Don't let the truth get in the way of a good story, or don't let the facts get in the way of the truth, or whatever, something that makes sense to say.
Sure.
But like every episode, he had a different experience that was like, I think any episode in isolation, you could look at and be like, oh yeah, there's a lot of like, that's a realistic look at like this club life. Like I liked the episode in the final season where Dov Davidoff played a comedian who was like a sexist older comedian who got like demoted when he was people didn't love his comedy for reasons that make sense. That's a thing that
I remember that
can happen. And I love watching the show. I think compared to a lot of other portrayals of comedy in fiction, because Pete has been a comedian for so long, and so many of the writers also have been. I think they did a great job of capturing it, encapsulating it, making like a diorama. Like if you look at a diorama, you're like, is this exactly to scale? Maybe not, but man, they did a pretty good job.
Yeah, no, they did. And then he should have had you on as a guest, but one show that you did get to go on as a guest that I think is really cool. You got to tell me about this. I think you just had a little cameo, but you were on the show Louie. So can you tell me about that? Like, how did that come about, and what was it like being on that set? Because that's one of my favorite shows.
I gotcha. And I mean, it's funny in a way, because I feel like they're, the way that when baseball players, I think, get home run records, but then we find out they were doping, you put asterisks next to their name or number.
Right.
Like, I mean, Louie for so long was, the guy, the biggest, the Carlin of his era, of that generation. And so I was, at the time, like, I mean, I felt very fortunate to have, I'd gotten to open for him a number of times. And wow. So the way that I got to be on the show was he I think he called me and left me a message and said, if you can get over here tonight to the Comedy Cellar, then do it.
Wow.
And I did. I mean, he booked other comedians who were just his friends and people who he knew to play. Like, I mean, there were so many wonderful people on that show. I loved. Yeah. I think Maria Bamford got to be on it. I think Doug Stanhope, who's one of my favorites. Like, I love and so it is, obviously, I feel like there's a comedian friend of mine named Reese Nicholson. Reese is an Australian man who I met at the Melbourne Comedy Festival in 2015, and then last year, 2018, he and I were at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival together, and we shared the same like large dressing room. We were in like the same complex, and when Louie's name came up, I bring Reese up because I think Reese said the funniest thing, because like Louie has been so influential and impactful in the lives of so many comedians and comedy audiences, but also it seems like there needs to be an asterisk of some kind, because if you bring up his name without, it seems like, are you ignoring? Are you not acknowledging? Like, there's been some other things have happened.
Yeah. Definitely.
Just separate it. So
definitely.
What Reese said, he was like, so as Louie said, God rest his soul.
Oh, God.
I think that's a funny thing, and encapsulated in shorthand for at least the people discussing the topic, that it's an important thing to consider, think about, and know about, while also like you can think fondly. People have complicated relationships with their families or certain relationships. It's
true.
It needn't, like, I was thinking about this recently, that I feel very grateful that I mean, my family, nobody's perfect. No family is perfect. Like, we all end up, like, we're all treated certain ways when we're younger. We're all treated certain ways when we're older, and then we become ways, and we can always be growing and learning and changing and thinking about how we want to be, how we best want to live. Like, if, like, my grandmother was abused physically a lot, and then she did not physically abuse my mother, but her mother had been abused. It was like a whole just a line back of abuse. And then at a certain point, so sometimes if you get abused, you abuse people. Sometimes if you get abused, you're like, I never want to do that to people. So that's why my grandmother didn't hurt my mother physically. Like, perhaps, who knows what else, there's emotional challenges for everyone. And so my mom also never hit me. If I had kids, I wouldn't hit them, right? I'm not even having kids, so there's not even anyone to hit.
Yeah.
And so I think that I feel grateful that I'm like, oh yeah, my family, average, very decent. And so that's easy. Like, I'm like, they're in my life. I care about them. I'm grateful for them. I spend time with them. For some people, they might have the opposite experience, where they're like, I know for sure I don't want my family in my life. They don't treat me well. So I'm cutting them out. I have my I don't talk to my biological family, but I talk to my logical family, my chosen family, not,
Yeah.
and so there's some on either end, there can be at least clarity. Like obviously that sounds like a much more challenging
Right.
road to go, but then also there's a challenge in the middle. If it's, if your family is challenging enough that you don't want to cut them out, but you also don't want to hang out with them all the time.
Right.
Like
It is
where are the
challenging.
boundaries?
You're right.
And
Yeah.
there's so many things like that where,
Oh, so
and I
many.
feel like we live in a society, maybe as human beings, like we like categorizing. We're like, is this good or bad? Is it dangerous
Yeah.
or helpful?
Black and
Is
white.
this, and there's so many situations, which, I mean, even that itself, that mode of thinking can be unhelpful sometimes, because like I have a friend who does a kind of therapy called dialectical behavioral
Oh
therapy.
yeah. DBT. Yeah, I've heard of that.
Yeah, and the idea is that these dialectics are essentially maybe conflicting emotions that exist within you, like and that they can both be true. Like you can have a resentment and also a love for the same person. Like you can, and we might beat ourselves up for I'll just say for myself, if I get into, like, a few weeks ago, I had an interaction with a friend that was challenging, and I didn't behave exactly the way that I wanted to behave. Like I either said things that I didn't want to say or didn't say things that I did want to say, and then later I was kind of beating myself up over it, and then I was beating myself up for beating myself up over it. And I want intellectually, to be compassionate to everyone, including myself, especially like in that situation. I don't think I did anything, quote unquote, wrong. I was kind of, the victim of my own circumstances, in that, like, nobody wanted anyone to not be feeling good in this interaction between me and my friend, but I spiraled into a darker place for a little while, until I could, either process it, acknowledge it, move past it, forget about it, some combination of all of those at a time. And now, in hindsight, I can look back and be like, well, the feelings that I had were legitimate at every point, but I kind of didn't want to have these negative feelings. And that's the thing for me. I'm like I'm not supposed to have these negative feelings. I was told I was good. I was told I was capable of doing anything. So if I'm capable of doing anything, like, why can't I be happy when I'm sad? Why can't, and then being accepting of the idea of being like, oh, okay, well, of course I'm not perfect. I'm not I'm not a divine enlightened Buddhist master at this stage, in this manifestation right now. I'm like, we're all one, so I am one somewhere, but right here, right now, I'm like, oh yeah, like, forgive yourself for not doing everything perfectly.
Well, one thing you did do, not necessarily perfect, but this is definitely a big highlight for you, was in 2009 you were on the Tonight Show, and it's interesting because I looked it up, and it wasn't the Leno show, it wasn't the Fallon Tonight, it was actually the Conan, which I love Conan. It looked like, and now you've been on Conan multiple times. But talk about that first time that you got to go on the Tonight Show. I mean, was that the moment where you called that girl that had turned you down and told her, "Hey, I'm on the Tonight Show, bitch"? Or were you really pumped about that? Did it feel, had to have been a huge ego boost, right?
Yes. I will say, I bet, knowing me, you can guess whether or not I did call the girl who turned me down. I like that.
I'm just saying that's what I would have done. I would have told everybody. I'd call my high school guidance counselor. I say, you said I'd never amount to anything. Look at me now. Isn't there a little piece of you, or do you feel like just success in itself is the best revenge?
I was with you right up until venge. I would say the best reward.
There you go.
Sincerely, so there's a couple things to say here. Number one, there was way more than one girl who turned me down. Number two, actually, I wrote a song about this when I was in college, because, like I said, I started having crushes on girls when I was 12, 13. I remember being but it seemed like everyone else, there were certainly the loud people who I saw. I was like, I don't know what it's like to be them, because they're I'm conflating two. Let me back up for a second. Like I wasn't like dating girls. I wasn't hooking up with girls like until I think I kissed my first girl when I was like almost 17. But it
Mm-hmm.
seemed like when I was like 13, 14, there was kids, hooking up, making out, like
Right.
sleeping together. Like I was like, it seemed like it was everyone. Like the same way that I was talking about like loud people earlier. Like if you don't realize that there are quiet people also, you might be like,
Mm-hmm.
it seems like everyone's loud because
Right.
everyone's loud. Everyone who's loud is making all the noise. The quiet people aren't making any noise. Are there even any quiet people? Obviously, there are. And so there were probably tons of kids who were feeling just what I was feeling. But I remember like eventually when I got to college, like I kissed a girl at summer camp when I was 16, 17, and then I kissed another girl and then and they also kissed me. It was a mutual kissing situation. I didn't just like run up and like peck somebody on the cheek and run away. And I remember in college, like I finally felt more like social and a part of things and a
Mm.
little more extroverted and more like the self that I was becoming. And so I wrote this song about how when I was a kid, I had wished for like a surprise party to happen, where at the surprise party, I would just show up and then they'd be like, surprise. And it would be all of the girls who I had ever rejected. And they'd all be like, just kidding. We all like you. And
Oh, that is
that was
hilarious.
that was a dream that I had, and so I wrote as a song about this concept. And then the ending of the song is that I eventually this kind of gradually happened, not literally with every girl, but the fact that now there were people that I liked, people who I had crushes on, people I was attracted to, who also felt the same way about me, and that I
Mm-hmm.
was going on dates, I was having
Yeah.
girlfriends, I was being social. I was like, oh, like the surprise party happened, but gradually, the greatest surprise, I didn't even know it was a party until I looked
Mm-hmm.
back and saw like the discrepancy between the past and now.
Yeah.
And so the same thing with comedy, like the everything also happened gradually. Like I knew when I started I wasn't good and that I could become good. That was I was hopeful and optimistic that I could it by doing it. And then you asked earlier, like when in 2005 when I won the U's Funniest Student competition, was that a moment where like it was a nice thing to happen. It was a nice
Mm-hmm.
milestone. But by that point, I've been doing comedy maybe like 3 or 4 years,
Yeah.
and I was developing. I had confidence at every point, but I feel like the same level of delusional self confidence that I had um, was decreasing in delusion and
Mm-hmm.
also increasing in awareness. Like, because I feel like to be a comedian, to be an artist, a performer, a creator of any kind, you need some combination of like delusional self confidence to know that
Yeah.
what you're doing is important, even when you're not good at it. And then you also need the self awareness to like reflect later and be like, oh, yeah, I want to get better because this isn't good yet. You need to have it be
Right.
an accurate reflection, and also you need to have like a potentially for myself a rosy I'd be like, oh, like that was bad before but I'm good now. Even if it's not true, it'll help keep it, carrying you to the next level. And so that was also happening with like steps in the Boston comedy scene. Like
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't getting paid work, and then I did get a job, and then I got another job, and I
Mm.
kept getting
So there
more
was
and
many
more.
milestones. It wasn't just like one thing. It was a lot of steps. What it sounds like?
That is so. But looking back, certainly being on the Tonight Show for the first time
Yeah.
was a great pleasure. Like when I mean, even getting the email from the booker,
Yeah.
who is still the booker of Conan. Like I in like June of 2009, I think. I got an email from a guy who said that he had seen me 2 years earlier auditioning
Wow.
for a different festival that I didn't get. I got a call back to the festival that HBO used to put on in Aspen, and he said he liked me then, and now that
Wow.
he was in a position to potentially to book the stand up on
Oh.
Conan's show, which was the Tonight Show, that I think it was just starting
Oh.
in June of that year, and he
Wow.
said, here's these jokes of yours that I like. If you want to put together a tape for consideration, that'll be great. And I had just started working with a manager, and I wasn't even sure if it was like true or a prank. I was like, the email says it's coming from
Yeah.
NBC, but is this? I don't know. I didn't know his name at the time,
Right.
and so but I found out that it was legitimate, and I started working with him, and we eventually, I think in July, locked in what set it would be, and I had it on tape, and then learned maybe in November that I'd be taping it in December. So it was again a piecemeal process, but then when doing it was full of kind of nerves and value, and it was beautiful. Yeah, I had no thought about going back, and like there was nobody that I was mad at.
No, I mean, I'm kind of half kidding with that, but I'm just, it's got to feel that like kind of top of the world feeling where like, okay, I've made it. I don't know if there were people that didn't believe in you. I mean, you've obviously proved them wrong by doing that. And then you continue to go on Conan. So you still have that relationship with the booker then, because you were on there like 5 times or something, right?
Oh yeah. Something like that. Yeah. I mean, it felt wonderful because part of comedy, part of, I think, any artistic endeavor is you're expressing yourself in a way, hopefully, that only you can.
Mm-hmm.
And then also, it starts from you. Comedy doesn't start from what do I think people will laugh at. It starts from what do I think is funny or meaningful or important or personal or resonant to me. And then you express that. And then, through working in front of different audiences, like the audiences, like instruments that help you, tune future audiences, tune the material. Like it's all like kind of you're the instrument, they're the instrument. And eventually, like the question of, of course you want them to laugh. Of course you want the response. But the response is also kind of a bonus to the doing, the process. Again, like when you're doing the thing that is your thing, that is hopefully, uniquely yours as much as anything can be, then also, yes, these external measures, like I loved Conan. I loved Letterman. Like getting to be on their shows was a particularly special feeling, because it's like, oh, this person who I think is funny and special now is offering me this opportunity based on the fact that I am, in my way, funny and special. So yes, certainly. Long answer, all of that. Short answer, yes, it felt good.
Yeah. So then, I mean, going kind of what about the appreciation of artists? Like, things are obviously very different in 2019 with fans and like people always ask me, how do you get these guests on your podcast? I'm like, I just message them. So like with social media and the meet and greets after shows, it's obviously a lot easier for comedians and musicians and other entertainers to interact with their fans. And there seems to be a bigger desire to do that, to get the selfie, to meet with them. Do you think that it's too much in terms of fan interaction, or do you feel like it's like a necessary evil that you got to do it whether you like it or not, or do you enjoy it?
I will say that I'll try to do the short answer now.
Okay.
I enjoy it.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, especially like along the theme of the gradual nature by which this all happens. Like there's some people who at a certain point, if you have millions of followers, millions of people who are, listening to what you say and do and responding, you might not be able to respond to millions. But right now, let's say I have 45,000 followers on Twitter and maybe somewhere around 18,000 Facebook fans, which is like, that's a lot of people. It's more people than I could name or count, but they don't all respond to everything I do. So like if I post something, like, I mean, there have been some tweets that have gone like massively viral in a way that I couldn't respond to everything. But then also, some of them might be a few people respond. And if somebody responds positively, I'm grateful for it, because I remember, and it's still happening now, that like, I can't do what I'm doing without people, responding to it, enjoying it, paying for it, sharing it, buying my albums, coming to my shows. And I am an extrovert. I am a person who like thrives on, the communion of this sort of thing. Like I've dated people who started as fans. I have people who've become very good friends because they liked my comedy and they reached out to me. And so, it used to be, I was just a guy on Facebook and I had friends, and if people commented, I would comment and we'd have conversations, and that's how it was. And that's kind of still how it is. Like if somebody makes a joke and I like it, I comment, or I like it. If somebody says something nice about a post that I make, I do my best to respond to everyone who says something nice. And if people say things that aren't nice, I sometimes will maybe take a beat, wait, strike when the iron is cold, see how I feel about it, maybe say something back, be like, why do you say that? Why do you think that? Can we, even if we disagree about something, unless it's like somebody's core identity being, disrespected or disavowed. But if it's like, if I have one political view and somebody has a different one, like if we come into things open-mindedly, like I can overdo it. I sometimes, spend too much time online.
Yeah.
I think but partially because I do enjoy it. I do like connecting with people. I do like communicating with people, and especially when they are fans, especially when they like what I do, when they like my comedy, when they're saying nice things, when they sometimes are adding their own valuable, funny, meaningful thoughts and things. Like I've also had comedy develop I've like shared pieces that started from fans saying things or friends saying things. And it's beautiful. Like the new hour of comedy I'm working on, my girlfriend's not a comedian, but the hour is a lot about her and our relationship and my history with relationships and my growing as a human being and a boyfriend and a person, and the concept of marriage and togetherness and monogamy and forever. And she has helped me with my jokes, and she has provided her, like, some of it is about how, because we are a couple together and she's not a comedian, like if we have a funny experience or if she says something funny specifically, like she's not using it as a comedian, so I can, because she's a generous, gracious gifter.
That's great.
But yeah, so I do love, and also this relationship is like the longest one I've ever been in. It's like 3.5 years now. And we met because she's a comedy fan. She came to comedy shows in New York. She saw me. We became Facebook friends. I didn't realize that happened because I have a lot of Facebook friends, and she like recommended a book to me. I responded, but we didn't like do anything further from that until years later. I think that was, several years before we met in person. And I saw her after a show and wanted to talk to her, and she was like, I want to talk to you. And now we haven't stopped talking. So
that's great.
I feel like I like talking to people.
That's awesome. Well, I want to thank you so much for being on the show. I know I have more questions, but I feel like it's probably time to wrap it up because I know you got to get back to your girlfriend.
I appreciate it.
I did want to bring up the highlight of a charity. You host a show called Myq Kaplan and Friends with Benefits. It's a comedy variety show that benefits a different charity every month. So I don't know if there's any charities you'd like to highlight here on the show before we end it.
Sure. I'll say that there's a website called givewell.org. Do you know that?
No.
So givewell.org is itself essentially like a charity vetting organization.
Oh.
And so I learned about it through Peter Singer's book, The Life You Can Save, which I recommend. It's sort of about utilitarian altruism, essentially, and the help that we can do. If we have more at any point, then we can help somebody with less. And so GiveWell specifically looks at different charities and sees for every dollar they take in, like how much is actually going to the cause that they are purporting to help. And so they offer like sort of metrics as much as one can of efficiency. And they offer every year towards the end of the year, so right around now, like their top charities of the year. So if you go to givewell.org, you'll find the top one, I think, is usually something like the Against Malaria Fund or Foundation, because for like $4 or $5, you can get somebody a malaria net that might save their life. And so that's one. And then there's Give Directly, which just gives small, either micro loans or just, small amounts of money to people for whom that will make, all the difference in their being able to live, thrive, survive. So I would say go to givewell.org, and that'll bring you to a bunch of, there's other deworming and helping heal fistulas and like getting, clean water for people. Like I forget what they all are, but they're all there.
Great.
Givewell.org.
So givewell.org, you can check out your special is Small Dork and Handsome is on Amazon Prime right now. You're on all the social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I am as well. You have a podcast, Broccoli and Ice Cream. So if you like podcasts, you can listen to your podcast. And I think you also have a couple upcoming projects. You have a cameo in Stalking Emo about Stalking Emo Phillips. So I'm curious about that. And then a movie called, I think it's some sort of Mystery Mansion. I think you're going to be in that one too. That's coming out soon.
Oh yeah, those
Yeah.
are both things that I was a part of long ago that are still in the works. So yeah, if you look at my IMDb, if it hasn't happened yet, it
Yeah.
will happen. And
Okay.
I will also, in the coming year, release a new hour of comedy that I recorded this
Great.
year called All Killing Aside, and then
That's a great
I'll be.
title.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's one of my favorite. I mean, I think it's the best hour that I've made up to this point,
Oh,
and
good. I
so
look
I'm
forward to
excited
that.
to share it with the world.
Yeah.
So look for that in, I believe, sometime in hopefully early enough 2020.
Okay. And then you'll share this interview on your social media so they can
Of
all your
course.
fans can hear. Awesome. Thank you so much. Well, thanks for coming on. Is there anything else you'd like to highlight or say before we end it?
You did a very thorough job, and I appreciate it.
All right. Well, I appreciate you coming on. It really means a lot to me. And I was a little scared when we had the time change, but it worked out. So I appreciate it. Thank you for
Worked out
keeping your
great.
word.
Oh, I appreciate it. I wanted to talk. I love Dan
Yeah.
Wilbur. I had a great time, and
Oh
I
yeah.
thank
Shout
you.
out to Dan Wilbur. He is hilarious.
yeah.
I laughed so hard at his positive pranks, and I just became an
Oh,
immediate fan. And then he agreed to do my podcast. I don't know. I feel like it's almost like a miracle that both of you guys did it. It's really happy for that. So appreciate it.
Well, thank you, my friend.
Okay.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah. If you're ever in Phoenix or you have a show out here, let me know. I'll come see you. I'll bring an entourage.
100%. Definitely will.
Okay. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay. So that was Myq Kaplan. Wow. So much. There was some things that we didn't get to, but I think we covered a lot. And I really think everybody should check out his special. I'm going to start listening more to his podcast. I've only heard a couple episodes, but he's a very talented comedian. That clip that I posted on my Facebook page made me laugh. So that was my first introduction to him. And I knew right away, this guy's a good comedian. He's really smart. So definitely check out his stuff. If you want to follow me, I'm on all the social media. If you enjoyed this podcast, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. So then to make sure you won't miss any future podcasts from me. Otherwise, we'll wait until next time. You'll hear me on the next episode. I don't know when that will be. Hopefully sooner rather than later. Bye-bye.